I remember the exact moment my husband looked at our newborn son and said, "I want a DNA test." He said it in the cold, flat voice he used in meetings when he wanted to end a conversation. But this was not a business deal. This was our baby. Our tiny son was only 6 days old, wrapped in a blue blanket, sleeping against my chest. I had not slept properly in almost a week. My body still ached from delivery. My heart was still soft from bringing a life into this world. And the man I married looked me in the eyes and asked me to prove that my own child was his. That was the beginning of the end of the marriage I thought I knew. But what he did not know was this. The DNA test he demanded was going to destroy the story he had been living in for years. And the truth would not expose me. It would expose him. My name is Claire. And what happened to me changed everything I believed about love, marriage, truth, and the kind of man I had tied my life to. I still remember the smell of the hospital room that day. Clean sheets, antiseptic, the faint sweetness of baby lotion. My son was finally asleep, after crying for nearly an hour, and I was sitting up in bed, exhausted but happy in that quiet, broken way only a new mother can understand. My husband, Adrian, stood near the window with one hand in his pocket, staring out like the city outside him mattered more than the life inside our room. Adrian was the kind of man people respected immediately. Tall, polished, beautiful in a cold, expensive way. He owned a private investment firm that had made him one of the most talked about men in our city. He knew how to smile for cameras, how to shake hands, how to sound generous in public. People admired him. Some even feared him. And me? To the world, I was his wife. To his friends, I was the quiet woman who stayed home. To his mother, I was the girl who had lucked into a good life. But none of them knew what it felt like to live inside Adrian's shadow. They did not know how often he questioned me, corrected me, or made me feel like everything I said had to pass through his approval first. Still, I believed in him. I believed in our vows. I believed that if I loved him enough, if I stayed calm enough, if I gave him a child, maybe we would become a real family. So when he turned from the window and said, "Claire, we need to talk," I smiled weakly and asked, "About what?" He looked at the baby, then back at me. "About whether that child is mine." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. "What?" He crossed his arms. "You heard me." I stared at him. My mouth went dry. "Adrian, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said slowly, "that I want a DNA test." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. "A DNA test?" I repeated, like maybe saying it back would make it sound less cruel. "Yes. This is your son. Then the test will prove it." I felt something cold move through me. "Why would you even say that to me?" I whispered. He shrugged, like we were discussing a business report. "You were gone, often during the pregnancy. You had appointments I couldn't attend. You were emotional, distant. People ask questions, Claire." "People ask questions?" I said, my voice shaking now. "Or are you asking questions because you want to hurt me?" His eyes hardened. "Do not twist this. I am not twisting anything. I just gave birth to your child. Then you should have no problem proving it." I laughed once, but it came out broken. "You want to put our newborn through a test because you don't trust me?" He leaned against the wall, calm as stone. "Trust has nothing to do with it. I want certainty." His words hit me harder than any scream could have. Because certainty was what he always wanted. Certainty that I was obedient. Certainty that I would never challenge him. Certainty that he could look at me like I was something he owned and I would still stay. I looked down at my son. His tiny fingers curled like he was holding onto the edge of the world. "Adrian," I said softly, "you are looking at your own baby." He did not answer. That silence was worse than any insult. I should tell you now, before I go any further, that this was not the first time I had seen a crack in him. It was just the first time the crack opened wide enough for me to fall through. I met Adrian 7 years earlier when I was 25. and working as an event planner for a luxury hotel. He was a guest speaker at a charity gala. Everyone leaned toward him when he entered a room. He had this controlled energy, like he never wasted a word unless he wanted it to matter. When he spoke to me that night, he asked questions other men never asked. What do you do when a room is too loud? What makes a person feel seen? What is the one thing people always get wrong about your work? I remember thinking he was brilliant. I remember thinking he was different. He was not. At least, not in the way I believed. He was just good at being charming when it benefited him. We dated for almost a year before we married. In the beginning, he liked how calm I was. He said I balanced him. He said I made him feel human. But after the wedding, the compliments slowly turned into expectations. He wanted me to dress a certain way. He wanted me to answer the phone by the second ring. He wanted me to cancel plans if he needed me. At first, I told myself that every marriage had adjustments. Then I told myself that success came with pressure. Then I told myself that love meant patience. And all that patience taught me was how to disappear. Still, when I found out I was pregnant, something in me woke up again. I thought maybe this child would soften him. I thought maybe becoming a father would make him gentler. He had even cried when I showed him the ultrasound. He touched the image like he could not believe it was real. For 2 weeks after that, he was almost perfect. He brought me ginger tea. He placed his hand over my stomach at night. He told everyone at a dinner party that he was going to be a father and looked proud enough to burst. Then, slowly, he started changing again. A call from his office would make him leave the table. A business dinner would run late. A text message would make him disappear into another room. And every time I asked him what was wrong, he would say, "Nothing. You worry too much." But I knew him better than he thought. I saw the way he watched me at times. Not like a husband, like an investigator. The day our son was born, Adrian held the baby only once, just for a few seconds. His face was unreadable. I thought maybe he was overwhelmed. Now I think that was the moment the seed of doubt took root in him. The next 3 days in the hospital were a blur of feedings, pain, visitors, and exhaustion. On the 4th day, my mother came to see us. She lived 2 states away and had rushed in when she heard I was in labor. My mother, Elena, was the only person who could make me feel safe in a room just by being there. She was gentle, observant, and impossible to fool. The moment she saw Adrian's face, she knew something was wrong. After she left to get coffee, she came back into the hospital room, shut the door behind her, and looked at me with concern. "What happened?" she asked. I was too tired to pretend. "He wants a DNA test." My mother froze. "What?" I nodded slowly, tears filling my eyes. "He thinks the baby might not be his." Her expression changed in an instant. Hurt first, then disbelief, then anger. "That man has lost his mind," she said. I tried to smile, but my face trembled. "He said it so calmly, Mom, like he was asking for the weather report." My mother sat beside me and took my hand. "Did he say why?" "He says he wants certainty." She let out a short, angry breath. "No, he wants control." I started crying then. Not loudly, just the kind of crying that slips out when your body is too exhausted to hold the pain in anymore. "I did nothing wrong," I said. "I know, baby. I never betrayed him. I know. I gave him everything." My mother touched my cheek. "Claire, listen to me. A guilty man does not always accuse because he is smart. Sometimes he accuses because he is afraid you will see him clearly." I looked at her, confused. She brushed my hair back from my forehead and said, "Do the test." I blinked. "What?" "Do it," she repeated. "Not because he deserves it. Because the truth should never be scared of a test." I did not want to agree, but there was something in her voice that made me trust her. So when Adrian returned later that day, I told him yes. He looked surprised. Maybe he expected a fight, tears, begging. Instead, I said, "Fine, we'll do the DNA test." He studied my face. "You're agreeing too quickly." I met his eyes. Because I have nothing to hide. For the first time in days, I saw something flicker in his expression. Not relief, not guilt. A teeny bit of panics. It was so small that if I had been less angry, I might have missed it. He masked it immediately. Good, he said. Then let's get it done. The sample was taken 2 days later by a nurse who seemed uncomfortable being in the middle of it. She swabbed Adrian's mouth first, then our baby's tiny cheek, then sealed the samples in separate envelopes. I held my son close while they did it. He slept through the whole thing. I kept looking at his face and thinking, how can anyone look at a baby and see suspicion instead of love? The answer, I would learn later, was that suspicion had been living inside Adrian much longer than I had understood. After the samples were taken, Adrian became strangely quiet. He stopped looking at me directly. He became distracted, irritated, and jumpy. I asked him several times what was wrong. He kept saying, nothing. That word became unbearable. At night, while I fed our son, I saw Adrian on his phone in the hallway speaking in a low voice. Once, when he noticed me watching him, he ended the call immediately. Who was that? I asked. Work. At 1 inch the morning? Yes. I stared at him. You are lying. His jaw tightened. You are exhausted. Go back to bed. That was his favorite way of ending conversations. Telling me I was too tired, too emotional, too sensitive, too much. But something had shifted inside me after the test. Maybe it was the humiliation. Maybe it was the way he had looked at our son. Not with wonder, but with doubt. Maybe it was the deep, instinctive feeling that this was no longer just about a paternity test. So while Adrian was in the shower one night, I did something I had never done in our marriage. I opened his laptop. He had always told me not to touch it. He said it was private. He said there were confidential client files. He said I did not need to be digging around. But I was done asking permission to understand my own life. His laptop was not password protected the way I expected. That alone made my heart beat faster. I found an email thread with a fertility clinic, a bank statement from a private lab, and a series of messages between him and someone saved only as R. My hands shook as I opened the conversation. At first, it looked like medical scheduling. Then I saw the words that made my stomach turn. Do not let Claire suspect anything. Once the test is done, we'll know if the timeline matches. I need the report before Monday. My fingers went cold. What was he hiding? I scrolled more. There were messages about blood work, about old records, about a name I did not recognize. Then one line appeared that I read 3 times before it made sense. You are still the biological father unless the hospital record is wrong. I sat there frozen. Unless the hospital record is wrong. What did that mean? I took screenshots with my phone. Then I dug deeper. In a hidden folder, I found scanned documents from years ago. Lab results, a hospital discharge paper, a birth certificate photocopy. And there, at the top of one of the files, was a name that did not belong to our son. Adrian, but not Adrian's full legal record. There was a middle initial I had never seen before. And next to it, a date that made no sense. I heard the bathroom door open and slammed the laptop shut. Adrian walked out with a towel around his neck, glancing at me. What are you doing? Nothing, I said too quickly. His eyes narrowed. Why are you pale? I stood up, trying to stay calm. Who is R? His entire body changed. Just slightly, but enough. He stopped breathing for a second. What did you say? Who is R? I repeated. And why are you sending messages about a hospital record? He reached for the laptop. You went through my files? Yes, I said, my voice shaking now but steady enough to surprise myself. I am your wife. Or did that stop meaning something the moment you decided to accuse me of cheating? His face hardened. You had no right. I had no right? I laughed in disbelief. You accused me of lying about my child. I think rights left the room when you did that. He took a step closer. Give me the laptop. No. Claire. No. We stared at each other like strangers. Then he said very quietly, "You should not have opened that." My blood ran cold. Why? His mouth opened, closed. Then he said the one thing that terrified me most. Because some things are bigger than you think. I felt my whole body tighten. Tell me what that means. He looked away, and I knew. I knew there was a secret. A real one. Not the kind people use to excuse bad behavior. Something buried. Something old. Something tied to our son, our marriage, and possibly to Adrian himself. The next morning, I called the DNA lab and asked for the earliest possible update. They told me the results were ready, but only the person who submitted the request could collect them. Adrian had already left for the office. I sat on the edge of the bed with my baby asleep beside me and thought about what to do. I could confront him. I could wait. I could leave. But something in me told me that if I waited, he would control the story before I ever got the chance to see the truth. So I called my mother. She arrived within the hour. When I showed her the screenshots and the strange documents, her face went still in a way I had never seen before. "Mom?" I asked. "What is this?" She did not answer right away. That scared me even more. "Mom," I said again, "why do you look like that?" She sat down very slowly. She looked at the baby, then at me, and then she said, "Claire, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago." My chest tightened. "About Adrian?" She nodded once. I could hardly breathe. "What?" She folded her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. "When you were very young," she said carefully, "your father and I had many problems. We separated for a while. During that time, I made choices I am not proud of." I stared at her. She went on, voice trembling just slightly. "I was afraid, alone, and I met someone kind, someone who helped me when I should not have let him." I felt the room tilt. "No," I whispered. She closed her eyes briefly. "Claire, no." Then I understood what she was trying to say, before she fully said it. I stood up so fast I nearly dropped the baby. "You are telling me Adrian might not be my father's son?" My mother cried then. Not loudly, but enough. She nodded. I felt sick. "What are you talking about?" I said. "Adrian is my husband." "Yes," she said softly. "But if the records are wrong, then the test he ordered may uncover something else." I looked at the papers again, at the names, at the dates, at the hospital code. And suddenly, the message from his phone made sense in a horrifying way. "You are still the biological father unless the hospital record is wrong. Not our son, not me, Adrian." He had been checking whether his own history was false. His face from the previous night flashed in my mind. That panic, that warning. Some things are bigger than you think. I sat back down because my legs could not hold me anymore. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. She started crying harder. I was ashamed, and then I thought it was buried. I thought there was no reason to reopen it. I stared at her. Did my father know? Her silence was enough. I felt every part of my life begin to rearrange itself in real time. Adrian had not only been suspicious of me, he had been suspicious because he had reason to fear what a DNA test could reveal about him. That afternoon, I did something that changed everything. I went to the lab in person. I took the baby with me. I brought my ID, the copies of the documents, and the screenshots from Adrian's laptop. I asked to speak to a supervisor. At first, they refused to discuss anything without Adrian's permission. Then I showed them the irregular hospital references. That got their attention. A woman named Mrs. Patel led me into a private office and asked me to sit down. Her expression was professional, but serious. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, "there are inconsistencies here that concern us." "Tell me what you found," I said. She looked at the paper for a long moment before answering. We do not usually disclose details this way, but there appears to be a mismatch in the archived records from the hospital sample source. If the blood and parentage records are correct, then the issue may not be with your child. I swallowed hard. Then where is the issue? She glanced up at me. With the father's recorded identity. The room went silent in my head. I could hear my own heartbeat. What does that mean? She took a slow breath. It means the DNA profile associated with your husband suggests there may be a biological discrepancy in his own file. We would need additional verification. But there is a possibility that the man who raised Adrian is not his biological father. I sat there staring. Then very slowly I asked, "Are you saying he may not be who he thinks he is?" She nodded carefully. That is one possibility. My whole body went cold. The man who had demanded proof of my loyalty was carrying a secret about his own life so huge he had built his entire identity on top of it. And now he had brought this test down on both of us. I thanked the supervisor, took the papers, and left in a daze. On the drive home, my son slept in his car seat while my hands shook on the steering wheel. I kept thinking of Adrian as a boy. Was he ever told? Did he know? Or had someone hidden this from him? By the time I got home, he was there. He was standing in the living room, pale and furious. "You went to the lab," he said. It was not a question. I set my keys down carefully. "Yes, you had no right. You accused me of cheating on you with our baby in my arms. And you broke into my files. You left the truth where I could see it." He laughed once bitterly. "So you did find something." I looked at him for a long moment. "You knew." His face did not move. I said it again, more sharply this time. "You knew there was something wrong with your own records." He went very still, and in that stillness, I knew I had hit the center of the truth. "You knew," I repeated. His voice came out low. "Who told you?" "My mother." That was the first time I saw him look stunned. Not angry. Not powerful. Stunned. "Your mother?" he repeated. "Yes." He stared at me, and I saw it all happen in his face in pieces. Recognition. Shock. Then something darker. "Claire," he said slowly, "your mother is lying to you." "No, she told me enough. And the lab confirmed there's a discrepancy in your records." He took a step back as if I had slapped him. "You don't understand." "Then explain." He opened his mouth, closed it. Then he turned away. That silence was no longer just cruel. It was cowardice. I walked closer. "Adrian, explain it to me." He did not turn around. So I said the words that changed the direction of the room. "Are you adopted?" For a second, I thought he might explode. Instead, his shoulders sank. Not much. Just enough. And that was the answer. I felt my throat close. "No," I whispered. "No, Adrian. Tell me that is not true." He turned to me then, and the expression on his face was not the one I expected. It was not guilt. It was not shame. It was grief. "Yes," he said quietly. "I was adopted." I stared at him. The room blurred around the edges. "What?" "My parents told me I was theirs," he said. "They adopted me as a baby and never told me until after my father died. Or at least, that is what I was told." I could not process the words fast enough. "You said your father died when you were a child." "I meant the man who raised me." I backed away. "Then who are you?" His mouth tightened. "That is what I have been trying to find out." I stood there breathing hard, while the pieces fell into place in ways that made me feel sick. The messages, the lab, the hospital documents, the private investigator maybe, the fear, the test. He had not just been doubting me, he had been trying to find himself. And instead of telling me the truth, he had aimed his fear at me. I laughed then, but there were tears in it. "You made me feel like garbage," I said. "You made me feel dirty." You looked at our son and accused me of betraying you when you were the one hiding a whole life from me." He looked away. "I was going to tell you." "When?" He was silent. "Adrian, when?" "I don't know." I let out a broken breath. "That is not an answer." I was scared. "Of what?" He looked at me then, and for the first time I saw him not as a husband, not as a successful man, but as someone deeply, desperately damaged. "Of finding out I had been lied to my whole life," he said. "I should have felt sympathy. Maybe part of me did. But sympathy cannot survive betrayal when you are standing in the wreckage of it. So instead," I said, "you decided to lie to me." His jaw tightened. "I didn't lie. You absolutely lied. You set me up to feel like the villain in a story you were too afraid to tell." Our son began to fuss from the nursery. The sound cut through the tension. I turned away from Adrian and went to pick him up. When I came back, Adrian was standing where I had left him, but something had changed in his face. He looked tired. "Hola, les intouchables." "Claire," he said, "I made a mistake." I almost laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "A mistake?" I said. "You weaponized a DNA test against your wife and newborn son. That is not a mistake. That is cruelty." He took a breath, as if trying to steady himself. "I know. For one horrible second, I thought he might finally apologize properly. But then he said, 'I just needed to know whether I was building my life on a lie.'" I stared at him. "And did it occur to you," I asked, "that I was asking the same question about you?" That hit him. I saw it. I truly did. He lowered his eyes. And in that moment, the loudness of the whole story disappeared. No shouting, no dramatic collapse. Just a marriage standing in the middle of a truth too ugly to survive. The DNA test results came in 2 days later. Adrian insisted on being there when the envelope was opened. I almost said no, but I wanted to see his face when the truth arrived. My mother was there too. So was the lab supervisor, because the hospital record issue had become serious enough to require direct explanation. I held my son while Adrian tore the envelope open with shaking hands. He read the first page, then the second, then he stopped breathing. I watched his face go blank. The supervisor spoke carefully. "The child is biologically yours." I did not look at her. I was watching Adrian. He looked at the paper again, as if the words might change. "But," she continued, "there is a secondary report attached. The archive sample comparison linked to your original hospital identity indicates a possible maternity and paternity record error from the facility where you were born." Adrian looked up sharply. The supervisor continued, "In simple terms, the records tied to your birth do not match the family you believed raised you. You may not be biologically related to the couple listed on your birth certificate." The room went completely still. Adrian's hand trembled. I saw his eyes fill, but not with tears yet. With shock, with loss, with the collapse of a life he had spent years pretending was stable. He looked at me, and the expression on his face was so raw I almost did not recognize him. "My whole life," he whispered. I said nothing, because I did not know what kind of comfort I was allowed to give him after what he had done to me. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped the floor. "This cannot be right." The supervisor's voice stayed gentle. "We can initiate a full verification process, but the probability of a record swap is significant." Adrian stared at the paper with shaking hands. Then he laughed once. Not because it was funny, because the mind sometimes makes a sound when it breaks. He looked at me, and his voice cracked for the first time since I had known him. "I accused you," he said, almost in disbelief. "I accused you because I thought I was being betrayed." My eyes burned, but I stayed still. "And now I find out," he went on, "that I have been living as someone else's child." No one spoke, not even my mother. Adrian sat down slowly. like the strength had left him all at once. For the first time in our marriage, he looked small, not in body, in spirit. And I should tell you this honestly. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel relieved. I felt devastated. Because no matter how cruel he had been, he was still the father of my baby. And the man sitting across from me was a human being whose entire identity had just shattered in one afternoon. But compassion does not erase consequence. So I said the truth that mattered most. I am sorry this happened to you, I said quietly. But what you did to me was still wrong. He nodded once, but he could not look at me. I know. No, I said. You do not just know. You need to understand. You made me question my own body, my own loyalty, my own motherhood. You made me feel like my baby was a burden of proof. You looked at me with suspicion when I was at my weakest. His face tightened. I know. Then say it. He looked up. His eyes were red now, and in a voice that sounded like it was being dragged out of him, he said, I was wrong. It was too little for what I had survived, but it was the first honest thing he had given me in weeks. I wanted to say more. I wanted to make him feel every ounce of pain I had swallowed in the hospital room. But my son let out a small cry, and I turned instinctively to him. That tiny sound reminded me of the only thing in the world that still mattered. I left the room and went to the nursery. Behind me, I heard nothing. No argument. No apology. Just silence. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. Not because the truth was still unfolding, because it already had, and now we had to live inside it. Adrian threw himself into finding out who his birth parents were. He hired investigators. He requested records. He tracked old hospital files. He contacted adoption agencies. He even met with the elderly woman who had been listed as one of his original caregivers, only to learn she had passed away years ago. The more he uncovered, the more fragmented his history became. There had been a mix-up at the hospital where he was born. At least, that was the most likely explanation. A baby swapped. A paperwork error. An identity buried for decades. And in the middle of it all was the cruel irony that he had demanded certainty from me when he had none about himself. For me, the damage looked different. I stopped sleeping well. I jumped whenever my phone rang. I could not hear him walk into a room without feeling my stomach tight. I loved my son more deeply every day, but the joy of early motherhood had been touched by something heavy. A shadow had entered the beginning of his life. I started staying at my mother's place part-time. At first, Adrian begged me not to leave. Then he stopped begging and started apologizing. Then, finally, he started listening. Really listening. He did not try to defend himself anymore. That may not sound like much, but after what he had done, it was everything. One night, about a month later, he came to my mother's house to see the baby. I let him in because I wanted our son to know his father. Not because I had forgiven him, because those are not the same thing. He sat in the rocking chair while I fed the baby. We did not talk for a long time. Then he said, I thought my doubt was protecting me. I kept my eyes on our son. It was hurting me. I said. He nodded. I know that now. Do you? Yes. He swallowed hard. I am ashamed of how I treated you. That was the first apology that sounded real. No excuse. No blame. Just shame. I looked at him then. He was tired. Still beautiful in that expensive, cold way, but no longer untouchable. You need therapy, I said. He gave a faint, sad smile. Probably. No, probably, I said. You need help. I will go. And you need to face what happened to you without making me the target. He looked at our son for a long moment. I know. I nodded once. That was all. We are not one of those stories that ended with a perfect reconciliation and music swelling in the background. Life is not that neat. The truth did not erase the damage. It only revealed it. But I will say this. The man who accused me of being unfaithful became the man who had to confront the fact that his own life was built on someone else's silence. And the woman he tried to break became the one person in the house who refused to lie about what happened. Months passed. The paternity test was confirmed. Our son was his. That truth never changed. But the deeper truth was louder now. Adrian was not the child he had believed himself to be. And I was not the woman he had made me feel like. I eventually agreed to meet with his investigator and see what could be learned about the hospital mix-up. There were no clean answers, just old records, lost files, and one terrible possibility after another. It seemed likely he had been raised by loving adoptive parents who had hidden the truth, either to protect him or because they believed it would cause pain. We may never know fully. But he was forced to live with the consequences of that silence. As for me, I made my own choice. I did not leave immediately. Not because I was weak. Because I wanted to be sure my decision came from clarity, not from the rage of one moment. I needed to see whether the man who hurt me could become someone safe again. Not perfect. Safe. That was the line. And to his credit, Adrian did the work. He went to counseling. He stopped making excuses. He answered questions, even when the answers were uncomfortable. He learned how to hold our son without acting like fatherhood was a performance. He also learned something else, something I had waited a long time to hear. I do not get to decide what your feelings mean, he said one evening. I do not get to tell you that your pain is too much because I am uncomfortable with it. That was when I knew he was finally beginning to understand. Not because he was sorry, because he was willing to be changed. And change is harder than apology. Our son grew strong and healthy. He had Adrian's eyes and my chin. Every time I looked at him, I remembered the first day Adrian questioned his paternity, and I thought about how close he had come to destroying the very thing he was trying to protect. That is the tragedy of fear. It does not always destroy from the outside. Sometimes it turns inward and ruins everything it touches. As for me, I learned to stand in my truth without asking permission. I learned that a woman who has been doubted can still rebuild herself. I learned that love without trust is just control wearing a softer name. And I learned that secrets do not stay buried forever. They wait, and then they rise at the worst possible time. 1 year after the test, Adrian and I sat together on the back porch while our son slept inside. The night air was quiet. He looked at me and said, "Do you hate me?" It was the first time he had asked me that, without trying to protect himself from the answer. I thought about it carefully. Then I told him the truth. "No," I said. "I do not hate you." He looked relieved for half a second. Then I continued, "But I do not forget either." He nodded. "I know, and I may never look at you the same way again." He swallowed. "I know." I folded my hands in my lap. "You taught me something terrible," I said. "You taught me that a person can love you and still choose to wound you. So now I need a different kind of love. One that is honest. One that is humble. One that does not need to accuse me to feel strong." He sat there quietly. Then he said, "I am trying to become that man." I looked at him for a long moment. "Then keep trying," I said, because that was all I could offer. Not forgiveness as a prize. Not trust as a gift he had already earned. Just the chance to become someone better than the person who had once stood in a hospital room and demanded proof from the woman who gave him a son. And if I am being honest, that is the ending I would choose again. Not because it was easy, not because it was clean, but because it was real. And sometimes real is the bravest thing left. So when people ask me now what happened after he demanded that DNA test, I tell them this. The test proved our baby was his, but the deeper truth was far more painful. It proved that the man accusing me was the one standing on broken ground. It proved that the secret in our marriage was not mine at all, and it proved that the life he built his pride on was only ever as strong as the lie he refused to face. My name is Claire, and I once thought the worst thing a husband could do was doubt his wife. A few days after that conversation on the back porch, something happened that I did not expect. Adrian came home holding a folder. Not just any folder. A thick, worn, old-looking file with yellowed papers inside. He placed it on the kitchen table and stood there for a second without speaking. I was washing baby bottles when I noticed him. "What is that?" I asked. He did not answer right away. Then he said, "I found something." That sentence made my stomach tighten, because every time Adrian said he had found something lately, it meant the truth was about to get heavier. I dried my hands and walked over slowly. He opened the folder and slid a stack of documents toward me. "These are from the old hospital," he said. The investigator found a sealed storage record that was never digitized. I looked down at the pages. My eyes moved over dates, names, signatures, and handwritten notes from people who had probably never imagined their paperwork would one day destroy a family. Then I saw the line that made my breath catch. "Male infant transferred under incorrect identification band." I looked up at Adrian. "What does this mean?" His jaw was tight. "It means the hospital made a mistake," he said quietly. "A very bad one." I stared at the paper, trying to understand. He kept talking, but his voice sounded far away. 2 babies were born within minutes of each other. Same ward, same shift, same night. One of the identification bands was switched. It looks like I was raised by the wrong family. I felt my whole body go still. Not because I was shocked. Because deep down, I had already known this truth was bigger than a single DNA test. I looked at him carefully. "And what about your biological parents?" I asked. He shook his head. "That is the part I have not figured out yet." The room went quiet. Our baby was sleeping in the living room, wrapped in a little white blanket, making tiny sounds only babies make when they dream. I watched Adrian stare at the folder like it was a wound he could not stop touching. Then I asked the question I had been afraid to ask. "Who else knows?" "No one," he said. "Not yet." The word "yet" stayed in the air between us, because it meant the truth was not finished, and neither were the consequences. That night, after our son fell asleep, Adrian sat alone in the dark living room while I stayed in the bedroom pretending to read. But I was not reading. I was listening to silence, listening to the sound of a man trying to hold himself together after being told his entire life was built on a mistake. And for the first time in a long while, I did not hate him. I was still hurt, still angry, still afraid of how deeply he had cut me. But I could see now that he was also broken in a way that had been hidden from him for decades. The next morning, he asked me to come with him. "Where?" I asked. "To the hospital archives." I almost said no. Then I looked at our son in his high chair, smearing banana on his cheek, and something in me softened. So I went. The hospital archives were in a separate building behind the main campus. Old, quiet, plain. Nothing about it looked like the place where a life-altering secret might have waited for 28 years. A records officer met us and brought out an old box labeled with faded ink. Adrian stood beside me while she opened it. Inside were transfer sheets, birth logs, nurse notes, and one torn manila file that had probably been sitting untouched for years. The woman looked uncomfortable. "We are only able to release this because your attorney requested a special verification review," she said. Adrian nodded, barely listening. His eyes were fixed on the file. I could see his hands trembling. For all his confidence, for all his polished suits and expensive watches, this was the first time I had ever seen him look afraid in a real, human way. The officer began reading aloud. There were 2 male infants born within 11 minutes of each other on the same night. She paused. One was marked for transfer to the Carmichael family. Adrian froze. The woman looked down at the page again. The other was marked for transfer to the Hayes family. I felt my heart stop. Hayes. That was our last name. My hand flew to my mouth. Adrian turned to me slowly. What? I looked at the paper again. The Hayes family. That was my father's family name. My mother had remarried when I was young, but the name still lived in old records and family documents. I whispered, Adrian, do you see this? He read the page, then looked up at me like the floor had vanished beneath him. What are you saying? I swallowed hard. I am saying there is a chance, I whispered, that the baby who was meant to be with my family ended up with yours. His face drained of color. The officer looked between us, clearly realizing she had stepped into something painful and complicated. She said gently, the records suggest the infants may have been switched before discharge. No one spoke, not for several seconds, maybe longer. I was the first to break the silence. Then my family and your family were connected by a hospital mistake, I said. Adrian sat down in the chair behind him, almost stunned into weakness. And that means, he said slowly, I might have been raised by the wrong parents. I nodded, even though saying it felt unreal. The records officer handed us copies of the archive notes and quietly excused herself. When she left, the room felt smaller. He covered his face with one hand. I had never seen him do that before. Not in public. Not at home. Not anywhere. He always tried to look composed. Always tried to look above pain. But now he sat there like a man who had just realized the life he had defended so fiercely might not have belonged to him at all. I sat down beside him. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he said, without looking at me, I accused you because I thought the baby would reveal I was foolish. I stared at him. He kept going. I thought, if I found out he was not mine, then at least I would know I was not the only one living inside a lie. His voice cracked a little on that last word. Lee. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, you did not just accuse me because you were afraid of a lie. You accused me because you were afraid to look at your own life. He nodded once. Yes. For some reason that answer hurt more than the accusation itself. Because it was true. And truth has a strange way of hurting less when it arrives, honestly. After that visit, everything changed in small, quiet ways. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough to make daily life feel different. Adrian started making phone calls. A lot of them. Lawyers, investigators, old records offices, doctors, adoption specialists, and people from his childhood who remembered things he had once been too young to question. At first, he would do it in another room. Then eventually he stopped hiding it from me. I was not part of his search. Not exactly. But I could hear it happening, and I could tell it was taking pieces out of him. The man who used to control every room he entered was now learning what it meant to be uncertain. I should have felt satisfied. Maybe I did. A little. But mostly I felt tired. Because when you have spent months trying to survive someone else's suspicion, you do not instantly become tender just because the truth turns around and bites them too. I was still the woman who had been humiliated. Still the mother who had watched her newborn become the center of a cruel question. Still the wife who had been told, in the ugliest possible way, that trust did not belong to her. So I kept my distance. I cared for our son. I answered questions when I needed to. I spoke to my mother often, and I watched Adrian begin to unravel. Not in a messy, dramatic way. In a quiet, exhausted way. He slept less. He ate less. He stared at old photographs longer. One evening I found him in the nursery, holding our son while looking at himself in the tiny mirror above the changing table. He did not hear me enter. I watched him for a second. Then he said, without turning around, "Do you think he will be ashamed of me one day?" I was surprised by the question. Why would he be? He gave a tired smile. Because I became the kind of father who doubted him before he could even speak. I did not answer right away. Then I said, children remember what you do, but they also remember what you do after you are wrong. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw him trying to hold on to that sentence like it was a rope. For the first time, I understood something important. He was not asking for my forgiveness only. He was asking for a chance to become a better man in his son's eyes. That did not erase what he had done to me, but it told me he was finally looking in the right direction. A week later, Adrian got a call from the investigator. He had located a woman in another state, an elderly woman, a retired nurse, someone who had worked at the hospital the night Adrian was born. The investigator believed she might know more about the switch. When Adrian told me this, he was so tense he could barely speak. We should go, he said. I looked at him carefully. You want me to come? Yes, he said. I do. That surprised me, because for months, everything in our marriage had been about separation. His secret, my shame, his fear, my defense. But now, for the first time, he was asking me to stand beside him while he faced the truth. So I agreed. We drove 6 hours the next day. Our son stayed with my mother. The road was long and quiet. At times, he drove with both hands on the wheel, jaw set, eyes forward like he was preparing for a war.